Blake Alexander had everything: wealth, power, and the kind of charm that made women fall at his feet. At 34, he was Boston's most eligible bachelor, the tech mogul who had conquered not only the business world, but also the hearts of countless women. His penthouse towered above the city skyline, a symbol of his empire built from nothing. From lavish charity galas to photo spreads with supermodels, Blake was the epitome of success. No one ever said no to him. At least that was until he met Emma Collins. In a world where a simple hello could land him the attention of any woman he desired, Blake was stunned when Emma, a quiet, reserved librarian from the Boston Public Library, rejected his dinner invitation. He had meticulously planned the evening, his personal assistant ensuring that everything from the rare blue orchids flown in from Thailand to the exclusive location was perfect. Yet Emma's response was swift and decisive. "Tell Mr. Alexander I'm not interested in becoming another notch on his designer belt." Blake's confidence, normally unshakable, wavered. No woman had ever turned him down before. But Emma. She didn't care who he was, and that intrigued him more than anything else ever could. This wasn't just another conquest for Blake. This was something new, something challenging. For the first time in years, he found himself confronting an unfamiliar feeling: rejection. It stung, but it also sparked a curiosity, a desire to know more about the woman who had ignored his charm and his wealth. Why did she turn him down? Was she playing hard to get? Or worse yet, did she simply not care about the lifestyle he so effortlessly flaunted? For a man who had spent his entire life conquering challenges and building a billion-dollar empire, this rejection was the one thing he couldn't solve with money or influence. But Blake Alexander wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He wasn't just going to let a woman like Emma slip through his fingers without knowing everything about her. Blake's obsession with her grew as he tried to unravel the mystery of Emma Collins, the head librarian, who had no interest in playing by the rules of his world. For Blake, it wasn't about dinner anymore. It was about understanding the one person who hadn't been impressed by his wealth, his status, or his carefully constructed image. And as the weeks passed, the more he discovered about her, the more determined he became to win her over by any means necessary. What Blake didn't know, however, was that Emma wasn't like the women from his past. She wasn't looking for the glittering world he could offer. She had her own reasons for avoiding men like him, and the simple yet complex life she had built in the quiet corners of the library meant more to her than anything Blake could offer. But for Blake, this challenge would be different from the countless others, and little did he know his pursuit of Emma would change not only his life, but the way he viewed love, success, and what truly mattered in the end. Emma Collins didn't care about wealth. She didn't care about fame or designer clothes or the endless stream of glamorous parties and charity galas. To her, all of it was just noise, an artificial distraction from the things that truly mattered. As the head librarian at the Boston Public Library, Emma found peace in the quiet, ordered world of books. Her life was simple, grounded in a sense of purpose, and her work at the library was more than just a job. It was a sanctuary. So when Blake Alexander, the city's most eligible bachelor and tech mogul, tried to court her with his extravagant dinner invitation, she didn't even flinch. She had seen it all before. The world was full of men like Blake, men who used their wealth and status to win the admiration of others, but never truly connected with people beyond the surface. They were charming, charismatic, and always had an agenda. But Emma wasn't interested in that. She didn't need validation from someone like him, nor did she want to be another notch on his belt. She was tired of superficial relationships, tired of being treated like a prize to be won. When she received Blake's invitation, she saw it for what it was, a carefully orchestrated gesture designed to impress. It wasn't about her. It was about him. He wasn't asking her to dinner because he saw something in her that he genuinely admired. No, he was doing it because he wanted to add her to his collection of admirers, just like the dozens of women he had charmed before. It didn't matter that he was rich, famous, or powerful. None of that moved her. She wasn't interested in becoming another accessory to his already perfect life. When she sent her response, "Tell Mr. Alexander I'm not interested in becoming another notch on his designer belt," she did so with quiet confidence. She wasn't trying to be rude or dismissive. She was simply being honest. Blake's reputation preceded him, and Emma had no desire to be a part of that world. She had no interest in the public spectacle of being with a billionaire whose every move was dissected by the media. She had seen enough of that, especially with her sister Katie's own past heartbreak after dating a man cut from the same cloth as Blake. Emma knew better than to get involved in something that wasn't real. To most, it would have been unthinkable to turn down Blake Alexander. He was the epitome of success, the kind of man women fawned over. But Emma was different. She had grown up with little, and she had learned to make do with what she had. She wasn't impressed by the shiny exterior that Blake presented to the world. What mattered to her was substance, depth, and authenticity, things that in her opinion Blake seemed to lack. He was just another rich man surrounded by people who wanted something from him. But Emma didn't need anything from him. She was content with her life, her books, and the quiet satisfaction of doing work that had real meaning. Her decision to turn him down wasn't easy, though. Blake was persistent and his charm was undeniable. But what Emma found most compelling about him wasn't his wealth or status. It was his complete lack of understanding of her world. She found herself intrigued by how someone so powerful could be so clueless about the simplicity and depth of a life not dictated by wealth and privilege. Blake was used to getting everything he wanted with the snap of his fingers, and Emma was the first person to refuse him, in a way that intrigued him even more. But Emma wasn't about to let herself be swept up in the illusion of romance that Blake represented. When she encountered him again at the library, her indifference to his charm only deepened her resolve. She was calm and composed, never letting Blake's impressive presence or reputation distract her from the reality of who he was and who she was. Blake didn't impress her because of his money or his fame. What did impress her, however, was how his approach shifted. As they conversed about books, she could see that his interest in her was genuine, at least at that moment. He was trying, albeit awkwardly, to be something more than the persona the media had built for him, and that intrigued her. Yet even as Blake showed a different side of himself, Emma couldn't forget why she had rejected him in the first place. She wasn't interested in being part of his world of celebrity and superficiality. She had worked hard to build a life that was meaningful to her, one that had nothing to do with public recognition or wealth. She had no desire to be paraded around like a trophy, no matter how much Blake might insist that he was different from the others. She had seen how quickly men like him moved on once the novelty wore off, and she wasn't about to be a casualty of another high-profile fling. When Blake persisted, asking her for dinner again, Emma hesitated. The offer was different this time. No private jets, no extravagant dinners, just a simple meal in a place of her choosing. There was a shift in his approach, but Emma wasn't convinced that it would last. She had seen enough to know that change wasn't always permanent, especially when it came to people like Blake, and so she remained firm in her decision not to engage. She didn't need his money, his status, or his charm. She needed something real, something that wasn't built on the fleeting foundations of wealth and celebrity. As Emma watched Blake, something in her softened. She wasn't immune to his charm, nor was she indifferent to the way he had helped her sister in her time of need. But she was also wary. Blake's world was far removed from her own, and she wasn't sure how much of it she was willing to accept. She still believed that true connection came from authenticity, not from the trappings of success. And while Blake was showing a side of himself that was more vulnerable, she wasn't ready to let her guard down. For Emma, the real question remained, was Blake truly capable of changing, or was he just playing another game? In the end, Emma's rejection of Blake wasn't a rejection of him as a person. It was a rejection of everything he represented. She refused to be part of a life that was dictated by external expectations. Emma Collins wasn't looking for a man to fix her life. She had already built it on her own terms. Blake Alexander had built his empire through sheer determination, never backing down from a challenge. He was used to having everything he wanted, whether it was business deals, luxury cars, or the admiration of women. But when Emma Collins, the no-nonsense librarian, turned him down, something inside him shifted. For the first time in his life, Blake experienced rejection, real rejection, and it stung. Women didn't say no to Blake. He was Boston's most eligible bachelor, a tech mogul at the top of his game. His life was a carefully curated series of victories, from record-breaking business acquisitions to high-profile galas with his name plastered across headlines and his face featured in the glossy pages of magazines. He was accustomed to adoration, and more often than not, women falling over themselves to be with him. Blake's charm was effortless, his power undeniable. Yet Emma had seen right through it all, and that more than anything intrigued him. He knew he had to do something different. He had to prove that he was not just another billionaire playing by the rules of his own world. Blake, who had always relied on his wealth, influence and appearance, realized that these tools weren't enough to win Emma over. What he hadn't counted on was the fact that Emma didn't care about his money, his reputation, or his status. She didn't even care about the glitzy dinners or the extravagant gestures he usually reserved for those who wanted a taste of his lifestyle. She was immune to all of that. So Blake, for the first time, took a step back and decided to approach the situation differently. The first thing he did was cancel his meetings for the following day. He told his assistant Marcus, "Cancel my meetings. I think it's time I visited the library." The words felt foreign on his tongue, as if he was stepping into uncharted territory. Blake had never had to work for a woman's attention before, let alone visit a public library to meet a woman. But for some reason, Emma had become an enigma he couldn't crack. And Blake wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The next morning, Blake found himself stepping off his private elevator into the quiet, serene world of the Boston Public Library. The bright golden morning light streamed through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the rows of bookshelves, the musty smell of old paper filling the air. The atmosphere was calm, almost meditative. It was a stark contrast to the constant hustle and bustle of his high-powered life. Here he wasn't the tech mogul or the billionaire playboy. Here he was just another man walking into a public space, hoping to meet a woman who had no interest in his money. Blake's heart pounded slightly as he approached the reference desk where Emma was shelving books. She was dressed simply, her chestnut hair pulled back into a practical bun, glasses slipping down her nose as she moved efficiently between the shelves. She didn't look up when Blake approached, didn't acknowledge his presence. To her, he was just another patron in the library, not the billionaire that everyone else seemed to fawn over. "Mr. Collins," Blake began, his voice calm, yet carrying an undertone of challenge. "I'm looking for a book recommendation." Emma glanced up from her task, her expression neutral, as if she was already accustomed to dealing with requests from all sorts of people. She didn't seem surprised to see him there, even though he knew his presence would certainly turn heads. "What sort of books do you enjoy, Mr. Alexander?" she asked, her tone cool and professional. Blake leaned against the counter, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm not sure," he replied, a touch of sincerity in his voice. "That's why I need a librarian's expertise." Emma arched an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "The self-help section is on the second floor," she said, her eyes never leaving his, specifically books on handling rejection. Her words hung in the air like a challenge of their own. She had noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. This wasn't the usual smooth, cocky Blake Alexander who could charm any woman into submission with a smile or a well-placed compliment. This was Blake stripped of his usual confidence, trying to connect with her on a different level without the usual tools he relied on. Blake smiled, momentarily caught off guard by her bluntness. It was refreshing in a way. "Actually," he said, leaning in a little closer, "I'm genuinely looking for something to read." Emma didn't break her calm facade, but she couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. Was this truly Blake Alexander, the notorious billionaire who had made headlines for his countless high-profile relationships, standing here in the middle of the library asking for a book recommendation? Was he actually trying to engage with her? Or was this yet another play in his vast repertoire of attempts to charm women? "Follow me," Emma said, her voice steady. She led him to the fiction section, keeping a careful distance between them. Blake followed her, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet library. As they walked, Blake's thoughts raced. He was used to making grand gestures, private jets, lavish dinners, extravagant gifts. But here he was standing in the heart of a public library, following Emma Collins through rows of books, hoping that something about this would be different. Once they were between the shelves, out of earshot from the curious onlookers, Blake finally asked, "Why did you turn down my dinner invitation?" Emma didn't hesitate. "Because I'm not interested in being photographed on your arm, dissected by gossip columns, then discarded when someone more exciting comes along," she said, matter-of-factly, pulling a book from the shelf. Blake was taken aback by her candidness, but he couldn't help but admire her blunt honesty. It was different from the women he was used to. The women who were more than willing to play along with his games. Here Emma continued, handing him the book. Pride and Prejudice. "It might teach you something about first impressions." Blake smiled. Surprised. "I've read it," he said, his tone a little softer now. Darcy was misunderstood. Emma countered. Darcy had to earn Elizabeth's respect. Blake's eyes softened slightly as he absorbed her words. Is that what I need to do? Earn your respect, he asked, his voice low, almost as if he were admitting something he hadn't fully realized until now. Emma studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Mr. Alexander, she said finally, I appreciate the theater of the humble billionaire visiting a public library. But we both know tomorrow you'll be back to your real life. Blake's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. You don't know anything about my real life, he said, a hint of genuine emotion in his voice. I know enough, Emma replied, her eyes narrowing slightly, thinking of her sister Katie's heartbreak after dating a man cut from the same cloth as Blake. Blake's heart beat a little faster, and for the first time in a long time he felt a stirring of vulnerability. Have dinner with me, he said, his voice quieter but more sincere than before. No private jets, no expensive wine, no pressure. Just dinner. Emma paused, genuinely curious. Why Blake considered his answer carefully, his eyes softening. Because when I donated to the library fundraiser last month, you were the only person who didn't care who I was. You argued with me about digital books versus physical ones without once mentioning my net worth. It was refreshing. Emma remembered the conversation but hadn't realized who he was at the time. She had been so caught up in the topic, so passionate about her beliefs, that she hadn't noticed the man in front of her. One dinner. Blake continued, his eyes not leaving hers. At a restaurant of your choosing. If you still think I'm the shallow playboy from the tabloids afterward, I'll never bother you again. Emma hesitated, torn between curiosity and wariness. But as she looked into Blake's eyes, something shifted. Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice, or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in a long while, Blake wasn't trying to be the person everyone thought he was. He was simply trying to be himself. And that intrigued her. Blake Alexander, the billionaire who had spent years using his wealth and power to get everything he wanted, was finally trying something new, something real. And that Emma realized was the one thing she couldn't walk away from. Emma Collins wasn't like the women Blake Alexander was used to. She didn't swoon at his every word, didn't melt under the heat of his smile, and certainly didn't let his fame or wealth cloud her judgment. To her, Blake wasn't a billionaire tech mogul. He was just a man who had arrogantly tried to sweep her off her feet with the same smooth tactics he used on every other woman. But Emma was different. She had seen the world in a way that made her skeptical of things that appeared too easy, too smooth, and too perfect. She had learned early on that appearances were often deceptive, and she wasn't about to fall for the glossy image that Blake presented. When Blake first approached her in the library, asking for a book recommendation, Emma saw right through his facade. She could tell that he wasn't there for just a book. He was there because she had rejected him, and now he was intrigued. Something about her indifference had sparked a curiosity that he wasn't used to feeling. Most people bent over backward to please Blake Alexander. But Emma was standing firm, unbothered by his status, unaffected by his wealth, and unimpressed by the notorious reputation he had built. To her, he was just another man who thought he could charm his way into her life. Blake's charm, usually a foolproof weapon, wasn't working on Emma. The moment he had stepped into the library, wearing his signature expensive clothes and confident swagger, he thought he would be able to dazzle her with a few words, show her his money and win her over like he had with countless others. But Emma wasn't fooled by his polished exterior. She had lived through enough hardships to know that real connections weren't made from money or influence. They were made from vulnerability, respect, and genuine care. And so far, Blake hadn't shown her any of that. When he asked her to dinner, she didn't give him an immediate yes, like most women would have. Instead, she took her time, choosing to stay calm and calculated. She was used to being independent, standing on her own 2 feet without needing anyone to validate her. Blake's invitation, though tempting in its own way, didn't move her in the slightest. She wanted to see if he could prove that he wasn't just interested in adding her to his list of conquests. She wanted him to show her that he was genuinely interested in her as a person, not just as a trophy to display at the next gala. I'm not interested in being photographed on your arm, dissected by gossip columns, then discarded when someone more exciting comes along. Emma said, her voice clear and steady as she looked him in the eye. She had no intention of being just another notch on his designer belt, Another name to add to the long list of beautiful women he had used and discarded. No, she wasn't going to let Blake get away with his usual tricks. She wasn't going to be impressed by his designer suits or his fame. Blake, who had never been challenged in this way, was taken aback. He had expected Emma to fall for his usual charm, to be flattered by his attention. But Emma was different. She didn't care about the flashy displays of wealth or the charming words he used. Instead, she demanded something more, something real. She wanted him to show her that he wasn't just playing a game, that he wasn't just trying to add another beautiful woman to his collection. As Blake tried to explain himself, Emma wasn't interested in his excuses or his past relationships. She had heard all the lines before. She wasn't swayed by his attempts at justification. "I've read Pride and Prejudice," he said, trying to impress her with his literary knowledge. But Emma wasn't buying it. It wasn't about the books he had read or the charm he could muster. It was about who he was beneath the surface, and whether he was truly capable of seeing her for who she was. Blake's question, "Is that what I need to do?" "Earn your respect," was met with a firm response from Emma. She didn't say it with malice or contempt, but with the quiet strength of someone who knew her worth. Darcy had to earn Elizabeth's respect. She replied, setting the tone for what Blake needed to understand. Respect in her world was not a given. It had to be earned, and it wasn't going to be handed to him on a silver platter. Just because he was a billionaire, Emma didn't want to be impressed by grand gestures. She didn't want the lavish dinners, the flowers, or the fancy dates. What she wanted was authenticity, and Blake hadn't proven to her yet that he was capable of giving that. "Mr. Alexander," she continued, her voice cool but resolute, "I appreciate the theater of the humble billionaire visiting a public library, but we both know tomorrow you'll be back to your real life." Emma wasn't fooled by his sudden change of heart. She knew how these things went. Blake had a reputation, and she wasn't about to let him manipulate her into believing that he had changed just because he was interested in her. The challenge was not just about rejecting him. It was about seeing if he could rise above his old habits and prove that he truly cared for her. Emma wasn't interested in becoming another chapter in Blake's endless list of conquests. She wasn't interested in being swept off her feet with flashy displays of wealth and status. No, she needed him to show her something deeper, something real. Blake, in his usual fashion, was persistent, but this time his persistence was different. He didn't make another grand gesture, didn't try to impress her with his power or wealth. Instead, he listened to what she had to say, and for the first time in a long while he began to understand that maybe there was more to life than being the center of attention. Maybe the game he had been playing for years wasn't the game he wanted to play anymore. Maybe he was ready for something different, something real. As Blake spent more time trying to understand Emma, trying to show her that he was more than just the billionaire playboy he was portrayed as, Emma began to see glimpses of the man beneath the surface. She wasn't easily swayed, and she wasn't about to let him off the hook just because he decided to change his approach. She needed to see consistency not just in his words, but in his actions. And so Blake continued to prove himself. Each small gesture showing Emma that maybe he was capable of more than just the shallow connections he had built his empire on. But he wasn't there yet. Emma, however, was willing to give him a chance, if and only if he could prove that he was truly interested in knowing the real her, and not just playing the game that everyone else expected him to play. Blake's quest to win Emma's heart was no longer about the flash, the power, or the prestige. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. But whether he could break free from his past and whether Emma would truly let him into her world was still an open question. One day, when Emma Collins received the frantic call about her sister Katie's apartment flooding, she didn't hesitate for a second. Family emergencies were something she was accustomed to handling, and as much as she hated to admit it, she was used to managing crises on her own. But this time there was something different. As she rushed to grab her things from the library, preparing to face the mess that awaited her, Blake Alexander followed closely behind, his presence still lingering from their earlier interaction at the library. Emma didn't ask for his help. She didn't need or want it. Her pride was something she carried with her, and she wasn't about to let a billionaire like Blake step in and solve her problems. This was her mess to clean up, not his, but Blake wasn't going to back down. As Emma hurried toward the staff room preparing to leave, Blake caught up with her. His expression, one of quiet determination. "Let me help," He insisted, "I can have a restoration team there in minutes." At first, Emma resisted. This wasn't his problem, she thought. But as Blake's persistence wore on, she reluctantly agreed. The moment she allowed him to help, something changed between them. Blake didn't just offer empty promises. He immediately made the call to get a professional team to her sister's apartment. Within moments, a team of restoration specialists arrived, flooding into the apartment with equipment designed to mitigate the damage. They weren't just there to sweep in and fix things. They were there because Blake had made sure they would be. But Blake's involvement didn't stop there. As Emma surveyed the damage, watching the water pour from the ceiling and threaten to ruin everything her sister had worked so hard for, Blake took charge. He rolled up his sleeves not as a billionaire tech mogul, but as someone who knew what it was like to have to deal with the messy realities of life. He didn't just stand there overseeing the disaster like someone who had people to do everything for him. He got to work moving furniture away from the worst of the flooding, helping to salvage what could be saved. Emma watched in shock as Blake's hands, which had no doubt signed multi-million-dollar contracts, now carefully moved bookshelves and delicate furniture out of harm's way. "You don't have to do that," Emma said, her voice filled with surprise. Blake simply smiled with a quiet confidence, responding, "I'm not completely useless." In that moment, something shifted in Emma's perception of him. This wasn't the Blake Alexander she had read about in gossip columns or seen in luxury ads. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire surrounded by models and publicists. This was a man who was willing to get his hands dirty, not for show, not for praise, but simply because it was the right thing to do. He didn't ask for recognition, didn't expect thanks. He just did it because Emma needed help, and he could provide it. As the hours passed and the restoration team worked tirelessly to address the damage, Blake remained by Emma's side. He didn't retreat into his world of high-powered business calls or luxury. He stayed helping her sister save what was left of her belongings, and even went so far as to help with the small details. When he noticed Emma's concerned expression as Katie frantically tried to save her manuscript, Blake immediately took over, carefully drying the pages with a hairdryer and paper towels. He handled the delicate manuscript as if it were a precious artifact, not something that could be easily replaced. His genuine concern for the situation was evident in every careful movement, in every decision he made. He wasn't just playing the role of the helpful billionaire, he was showing Emma that he was capable of understanding what truly mattered to her. Emma couldn't help but stare in amazement. This wasn't the man she had first met, the man who had been arrogant, aloof, and self-assured in a way that made her question his sincerity. This was someone different. Blake wasn't just trying to impress her anymore. He was being real, showing her a side of himself that she had never imagined existed. He wasn't here to buy her affections or win her over with extravagant gestures. He was here because he genuinely cared about what was happening to her family, to her sister, and to her life. "Why are you really doing this?" Emma asked, her voice softer now, no longer filled with suspicion, but with curiosity. Blake, who had been so composed and confident before, looked at her with a sincerity she hadn't expected. "Maybe I'm trying to prove you wrong about me," he admitted quietly. "Or maybe this is just an elaborate strategy to get you to have dinner with me." The playful tone was still there, but this time it felt different. This time his words weren't just an attempt to charm her. They were a reflection of the change he had gone through in such a short period of time. Emma couldn't deny that Blake's actions had impacted her. She had always prided herself on being able to handle things alone, but for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of relief, knowing that someone else had her back. Blake had shown her that he was more than just a man with a vast fortune and an endless list of conquests. He was someone who, in his own way, understood the value of family, of hard work, and of taking responsibility when things went wrong. As the restoration team finished up, Emma found herself feeling an unfamiliar sense of gratitude toward Blake. He had helped her when she needed it most, not with his usual grand gestures or lofty promises, but with simple, tangible actions that made a real difference. In that moment, Emma realized that Blake wasn't just the tech mogul the media had painted him to be. He was someone capable of kindness, humility, and genuine care. Blake's willingness to help Emma without expecting anything in return, his complete dedication to the task at hand, and the quiet sincerity he had shown throughout the ordeal, caused Emma to reassess her initial impression of him. She saw him not as the billionaire playboy who lived his life in the public eye, but as a man who had the capacity for genuine connection and understanding, and that she realized was worth far more than any wealth or status could ever provide. In the end, Blake's help wasn't just about saving her sister's apartment, it was about showing Emma that there was more to him than what met the eye. And it was in this moment, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, that Emma saw Blake Alexander for who he truly was, not just a billionaire but a man who was capable of surprising kindness, who had a depth to him that she hadn't expected. Blake Alexander had always been a man driven by success. From the moment he built his tech empire, he was determined to secure his place at the top. His life had been defined by acquisitions, mergers, and high-profile deals that seemed to elevate him further into the stratosphere of wealth and influence. However, the more success he achieved, the more hollow it felt. The billion-dollar deals and the glitz of his public persona never filled the emptiness inside him. It wasn't until he met Emma Collins that he began to question everything. Emma had entered his life like a breath of fresh air. She had turned him down without hesitation, refusing to be just another notch on his belt. For the first time, Blake had encountered someone who didn't care about his wealth status or reputation. She saw through the layers of fame and fortune, focusing on who he truly was beneath it all. This defiance, this indifference to his power, intrigued him like nothing else had before. The connection they shared over ramen books and simple moments of honesty made Blake feel more real than he had in years. But their budding relationship wasn't without complications. As Blake began to spend more time with Emma, he realized that her world was far removed from his. She valued privacy, authenticity, and integrity qualities Blake hadn't fully understood until he found himself drawn to her. He had become entangled in the public's image of him, a playboy tech mogul who was always on the go, always striving for the next deal. Emma, on the other hand, was an anchor, someone who grounded him and made him realize that there was more to life than business and success. The turning point came when Blake found out that a multi-billion-dollar merger he had been working on for over 2 years was in jeopardy. His board of directors was pressuring him to secure the deal, and everything seemed to be riding on it. It was a golden opportunity, one that would elevate his company even further and strengthen his position in the tech world. But at that moment, as Blake sat in his sleek office, staring at the papers in front of him, something changed. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had challenged him to be a better person, to be more than the billionaire playboy the tabloids had painted him to be. And when he realized that the merger deal was being jeopardized by the very image he had built, the image of a man who prioritized public approval, wealth, and status, he knew what he had to do. Blake decided almost impulsively to cancel the deal. It was a decision that would have far-reaching consequences, not just for his company but for his reputation as well. The board was furious. They had worked tirelessly on the merger for years, and Blake's sudden change of heart was seen as a betrayal. They argued that he was jeopardizing the future of Alexander Industries for something as trivial as his personal life. But for Blake, it wasn't trivial. Emma wasn't just another woman. She was someone who had shown him what it meant to be true to oneself. The decision to cancel the merger wasn't made lightly. Blake had spent years building his empire, making calculated moves and playing the game by the rules of business. But he had begun to realize that the life he had built, while impressive, wasn't fulfilling. What mattered to him now was not the billions of dollars or the mergers that kept piling up. It was the connection he had with Emma, the sense of authenticity he had found in her company, and the realization that he didn't have to live his life according to the expectations of others. When Blake called his board and informed them of his decision, the backlash was immediate and intense. They questioned his judgment, his priorities, and his ability to lead the company. But Blake stood firm. He had made a choice to live his life for himself, not for the approval of others. The merger could wait. His connection with Emma was more important. Emma was unaware of the decision Blake had made until later that day when he visited her at the library. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing on him. But when he explained why he had made it, Emma was taken aback. She had never expected Blake to be someone who would sacrifice something as significant as a billion-dollar deal for the sake of a relationship. But as Blake spoke, she realized just how much he had changed, how much he had grown since they first met. "I canceled the merger," Blake said, his voice steady, but filled with an undercurrent of vulnerability. I couldn't do it anymore. Emma. I couldn't keep living my life for the approval of others. I had to do this for me. And for us. Emma was silent for a moment, processing his words. She had never imagined that Blake, the man who had seemed so untouchable, so consumed by his empire, would make such a bold move. And yet here he was standing before her, admitting that he had made this choice for her, for their connection. It was a moment of profound sincerity that left her speechless. Blake had shown her something she hadn't expected, a side of him that was raw, vulnerable, and willing to change. He wasn't just the billionaire anymore. He was a man who was willing to sacrifice everything he had built to be with her. It was a gesture of trust, of commitment, and of real, tangible love. For Emma, it was a moment of clarity. She had doubted Blake's intentions at first, unsure if he was just another man seeking a superficial connection. But now she saw him in a new light. Blake wasn't just trying to win her over with grand gestures or empty promises. He was willing to sacrifice his empire, the very thing that had defined him, to be with her. It was a moment of profound change for both of them. For Blake, it was the realization that there was more to life than business and success. And for Emma, it was the moment she finally saw Blake for who he truly was. A man who had the courage to change, to choose love over power, and to live authentically even in the face of unimaginable pressure. After Blake's dramatic change of heart and his heartfelt actions to prove his sincerity, Emma began to see him in a different light. Blake had shown her a side of himself that she hadn't expected, a side that was vulnerable, honest, and genuinely invested in building something meaningful. This wasn't the self-assured tech mogul she had initially thought of him as. Blake had done the unthinkable, not just canceling a billion-dollar merger, but also diving into the most personal corners of his life, all for the sake of Emma. It was the kind of gesture that spoke volumes. Emma had spent so much time building walls around herself, shielding her heart from the glitzy world Blake represented. The life of a librarian, calm, measured, and simple, was all she had ever known. But Blake's determination to prove that he was more than the tabloid image, his willingness to give up everything he had worked for, left her wondering if she could allow herself to feel something more for him. Their relationship took a significant turn after Blake helped Emma with the flooding at her sister Katie's apartment. His calm and decisive actions to call in a restoration team alongside his thoughtful and careful help in saving her sister's manuscript gave Emma a clear view of Blake's true character. The moment where he revealed his background, how he grew up in South Boston, working alongside his father as a mechanic, shifted Emma's perspective completely. Blake wasn't just a billionaire with a pristine image. He was someone who had come from humble beginnings and had worked his way to the top. The authenticity in his actions that day softened her resistance. Still, Emma was cautious. She didn't want to rush into anything with Blake, not when his world was so vastly different from hers. But slowly, as Blake respected her boundaries, she found herself letting her guard down. They began seeing each other more regularly, their connection deepening as they shared more moments together. Their dates weren't extravagant or over the top, which suited Emma just fine. They spent time talking about everything and nothing, about their pasts, their dreams, and the things that made them tick. Blake took his promise seriously. He would go slow. For someone used to instant gratification, taking it slow was a challenge, but for Emma, it was a necessity. She needed to see if he was truly capable of the commitment he claimed. The fact that Blake listened to her, understood her hesitation, and never pressured her, only solidified the trust she was beginning to build in him. As they grew closer, Blake began to reveal more about his life. No longer the cold, calculated billionaire, he was opening up to her in ways that surprised even him. In a quiet moment, he admitted that he had never been able to connect with someone like he had with Emma. His life, once filled with meetings, charity galas, and public appearances, was now consumed by thoughts of her. He didn't want to be defined by his empire anymore. He wanted to be known for who he was, with her, not for the fortune he had amassed. Emma, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the pull of something real. Blake wasn't just the man who had helped her sister and supported her when everything seemed to fall apart. He was the person who made her laugh, who shared her love of literature, and who found solace in the same simple things she did. The more time they spent together, the more Emma realized that she was starting to fall for him. Not the billionaire persona, but the man who had cared for her and her family when he didn't have to. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Emma still had doubts, and Blake had his own insecurities. But the foundation they were building was strong. Blake had shown Emma that real love didn't require grand gestures or societal approval. It just needed honesty, respect, and the willingness to grow together. He proved that he could be vulnerable, and that he could put her first. Even when his entire world seemed to be collapsing around him, Emma in turn learned to trust someone again, and allowed herself to believe that love could exist outside the glossy world of fame and fortune. The more they shared, the more Emma saw the depth of Blake's character. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but he was real, and that was all she ever needed. Slowly, a relationship that had started off as cautious and hesitant began to blossom into something deeper and more meaningful. Their bond wasn't built on attraction alone. It was built on mutual respect, shared moments of vulnerability, and a willingness to be honest with one another. It wasn't long before Emma found herself looking forward to their next date, not as an obligation, but because she genuinely enjoyed being with him. Blake and Emma's love story was no longer just a fleeting connection between two people from different worlds. It was a testament to the power of real connection, of taking things slow, and of being open to change. And as their relationship developed, Emma knew that this was only the beginning. The story also delves into the cost of fame and the struggle for privacy, particularly for someone like Blake, whose life is constantly under the microscope. As a billionaire tech mogul, Blake's every move is scrutinized by the media, and his personal life is no exception. Initially, he relished the attention, seeing it as a byproduct of his success, but the moment he truly began to care about someone, Emma, he found himself in uncharted territory. For the first time in his life, Blake experienced what it was like to have his personal life exposed and dissected by the public. When he began his relationship with Emma, he wasn't prepared for the media frenzy that would follow. Their dinner, a simple act of getting to know each other, was quickly turned into fodder for the tabloids. Photos of them laughing, walking together, and even moments as intimate as Blake tucking a strand of hair behind Emma's ear were splashed across newspapers and gossip sites. The privacy he had once taken for granted was suddenly stripped away. Blake found himself in the position of defending his personal life in ways he had never imagined. He was no longer just the man who built a tech empire. He was now the subject of national gossip, and that reality weighed heavily on him. His world, once carefully curated to maintain an air of control and perfection, was now invaded by the constant intrusion of cameras and headlines. What was once an effortless existence of luxury and power had turned into a constant battle to preserve something real amidst the noise. Blake had never had to fight for his privacy before. As a billionaire, he was used to being admired, often from afar, and the idea of someone truly caring about him beyond his wealth and status had never seemed possible. But Emma was different. She wasn't interested in the luxury and fame that came with him. She saw through the facade, and it was only when the world started prying into their relationship that Blake realized the true cost of his fame. It wasn't just about losing his freedom to be with her. It was about losing control over how his story was being told. The pressures that came with being in the public eye took a toll on Blake. His reputation, built over years of hard work and countless public appearances, was now at risk. Emma's privacy was also at stake, and Blake knew he couldn't allow her to be exposed to the same media circus he had dealt with for years. This realization pushed him to make a difficult decision. He would protect her at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing a multi-billion-dollar deal that could shape the future of his company. The fact that Blake was willing to put his business interests on hold to protect Emma's privacy was a turning point in his character. In his decision to forego the deal, Blake demonstrated a side of himself that few had ever seen. He realized that the respect and privacy he had once taken for granted were no longer just luxuries. They were essential to preserving the authenticity of his relationships and the integrity of his own life. He no longer wanted to be a puppet of the media or the public's expectations. What he truly craved was a genuine connection with Emma, and he would go to great lengths to protect that connection. This sacrifice forced Blake to confront the reality of living under the glare of the spotlight. Fame, which had once been a symbol of his success, now felt like a heavy burden. He had to choose between maintaining the image of a perfect billionaire or embracing the vulnerability of being real, of showing Emma and the world who he truly was beneath the polished exterior. In the end, Blake's struggle for privacy was a stark reminder of the price of fame. It wasn't just about the money or the status. It was about the loss of personal freedom, the constant surveillance, and the feeling of being misunderstood. Blake's willingness to stand up against the media and defend his right to a private life marked a significant shift in his character. It was no longer about conquering the world. It was about finding something real and meaningful, something worth protecting. In the end, Emma realized that Blake was not the shallow playboy she had initially believed him to be. Her skepticism, built from years of seeing men like him in the tabloids, began to fade as she saw a side of him that was vulnerable and sincere. Blake had proven time and again that he was not willing to change for anyone else, but he was willing to change for himself. It was not about the fame, the money, or the luxury that had once surrounded him. It was about finding authenticity in a world that constantly demanded perfection. When Blake made the decision to forego a billion-dollar business deal to protect Emma's privacy, she saw him not as a billionaire but as a man who cared deeply about something real. He wasn't acting out of a desire to win her over through grand gestures or empty promises. Instead, his actions showed a depth of character and a willingness to prioritize what truly mattered. He was no longer the man who lived for the spotlight, but someone who sought solace in quieter moments with her away from the cameras and the pressure of the world. For Emma, this was the turning point. She had spent so much time pushing away the idea of a relationship with someone like Blake, convinced that he was just another superficial man who would leave once the novelty wore off. But as she saw him in these moments of self-reflection, doing things for her and her family, without expecting anything in return, her heart softened. It became clear to her that this wasn't about status or conquest for Blake. It was about something more profound, a connection, one that transcended the life he had built for himself and the public image he had carefully curated. In seeing Blake for who he truly was, Emma realized that he had earned a place in her life. She began to see him not as the billionaire from the magazines, but as a man who, like her, had struggled with loneliness and the longing for something real. She saw the genuine effort he was putting into their relationship, the small but meaningful actions that spoke volumes about his character. Blake wasn't just offering her a life of luxury. He was offering her a chance at something meaningful, a partnership built on mutual respect and authenticity. With time, Emma allowed herself to trust him. She started to feel a real connection growing between them, something based on shared experiences, honesty, and the desire to understand each other beyond the roles they had been assigned. She decided to give their relationship a chance, knowing that despite the challenges they might face, they had the potential to create something truly special together. Blake had shown her that love wasn't about perfection. It was about being real, vulnerable, and willing to fight for something worth having. And for Emma, that was more than enough to open her heart to him. The story concludes with Blake and Emma finding a sense of peace and fulfillment in their relationship, despite the external pressures and the constant attention of the public. Their journey wasn't without its struggles. Blake's fame, the media scrutiny, and the initial doubts Emma had about his true intentions. But they both proved that love and sincerity could overcome these obstacles. Throughout their journey, they learned that the most important thing wasn't wealth, status, or the idealized version of a perfect relationship. It was the genuine connection they shared. As they navigated the complexities of their differing worlds, they discovered that they valued each other for who they truly were beyond the superficial layers that society often placed upon them. Blake, once a man defined by his empire and public persona, found comfort in the quiet moments with Emma, who reminded him of the importance of staying true to oneself. Emma, who had been cautious and skeptical, learned to trust Blake's sincerity and the love he had to offer. They realized that love, when rooted in honesty and mutual respect, was far more valuable than any external validation. The media may have tried to dictate their story, but Blake and Emma took control of their own narrative. In the end, they discovered that being together was about creating a life that was meaningful to them, one built on trust, authenticity, and shared experiences. Their love story, though unconventional and challenged by the world around them, became a testament to the power of genuine connection. It wasn't about how they were perceived by others or what they could offer in terms of wealth and fame. It was about the bond they had formed, grounded in real emotions and an understanding of each other's hearts. As they continued their journey together, they knew that no matter what the future held, their love and sincerity would always be the foundation of their relationship. In the end, that was all that truly mattered.